What's up, Internet? You're tuning in to episode 87 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Split Screen Games weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Wasn't I on last week's episode, or was I not?
Hey,
Yeah, it was.
it's more of a general welcome back to us. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to you, the listener. The boys are back.
Hello.
No Max this week, unfortunately, but you and I are reunited, and it feels so good.
It does indeed, and we got a juicy episode, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so. So I won't bury the lead. We got two topics on today's docket. I think one of them's going to dominate the conversation, though. Of course, ROG Ally X has been revealed. It is the follow-up to the ROG Ally. Of course, everybody's favorite or least favorite Steam Deck competitor, depending on who you ask. But there's some brand new information about the new device. It's kind of, the next stage for what ROG is doing in the handheld PC space. And we're going to talk all about it, about the specs, about how it matches up to Steam Deck, about some interesting things about its relationship to the Windows platform, and answer a bunch of your questions and comments on that as well. And if we have time, we're going to talk a little bit about Steam OS's 3.6.0 preview update, which has gone live this week. But the main reason I want to mention it now is that's probably going to be our main topic next week, because word on the street is that there are some performance updates that come along with this update. So Steve and I were hoping we'd spend the week getting to play around with it. You guys at home could spend the week playing around with it if you are, checking out the preview builds of the OS, and report back on how it's affected your favorite games. And we'll report back on how it's affected ours. And we'll see, if those changes are anything to really write home about or not. And we can talk all about that on next week's show. But we'll see. If we have time in the back half, we'll probably touch on it a little bit. But I think this ROG Ally conversation is gonna take a bit of time, don't you, Steve?
Mm-hmm. I do, yeah. Yeah, so yesterday, to much, I guess, not real fanfare, they didn't really reveal it. They're going to do a full reveal on June 2nd, but in like a little birthday celebration for the ROG Ally, Asus announced the ROG Ally X. It's not a true sequel to the ROG Ally 2, but Asus says they want to ship an improved version of the original console in the same way that the Steam Deck OLED was like the definitive edition of the Steam Deck. That's what the ROG Ally is going to do. So it comes with a bunch of improvements, but it is essentially the same machine. It has the same system on a chip. It has the same Z1 or Z1 Extreme chip in there. But it does come with some updates. It's going to be in a new black colorway with improved housing. And that housing is there to accommodate a larger battery pack, and Asus says that you can expect more than 30 to 40% improvement, which equates to about 1.5 hours of game time in the most intensive games.
I think that's definitely the headline, right? Like, I think similarly to the OLED deck, right? Like, that's the thing I always tell everybody when they ask me whether it or not it was worth the upgrade. It's like, yeah, a nicer screen is obviously a nice thing, but having 30-40% extra battery life, that makes a really big difference, especially if you use the thing to travel, right? If you're somebody who takes your Ally on the road, if you're flying a lot, something like that. An hour and a half with AAA like high intensity games that's a lot of extra playtime. And if you're playing something less intensive, it's you're probably looking at double that, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, the way they've accommodated that is they put a bigger battery pack in, which does mean the device is heavier than it was previously. Whereas the OLED model was lighter than the original Steam Deck because they didn't really improve the battery packs in size. It increased marginally, but the main improvements there came from the more efficient system on a chip. They did a die shrink, so it became more efficient. They used those efficiencies to work with battery life rather than performance. And Asus has said that they weighed it up when they did the initial reveal of the ROG Ally, and they didn't know if people wanted a heavier device with more battery life or more battery life. They've kind of gone with the consensus that more battery life is better. Well, it's kind of crazy to me that you can still only get an hour and a half out of this thing on some of the more intense games, though.
For what it's worth, the original device based on this is coming from Best Buy, so grain of salt. But it says that the weight of the original device is only 1.34 pounds, so it was pretty light to begin with. So the idea that that they made it a bit heavier is I don't really think that doesn't sound like it's that much of a big deal. I mean, the base Steam Deck, sorry, the OLED deck is 1.41 pounds. So it's like, depending on how much heavier, it sounds like it might actually just be about the weight of a Steam Deck, which is not bad, right? I think most people talk about how the Ally is lighter. So I think
Yeah, and they have said that they are improving the ergonomics a little bit. That they're putting revised grips on it. They've also tweaked the D-pad and the triggers, so hopefully it'll be a little bit more comfortable to hold. Alongside that, they've improved the joysticks. They're now separate and replaceable from the main board in the same way that they are on the Steam Deck. So hopefully we'll see something like Gilly Kit doing aftermarket Hall Effects ones. There is going to be more RAM in the device. They've not given specifics yet. That's going to be coming on June 2nd. It's currently at 16 gigabytes in the device, which means that if they add more RAM, they can feed the GPU a little bit more without the OS kind of sucking up all of the RAM. They've swapped out the SSD slot. It's not the 2230 chip that's on the current ROG Ally and on the current Steam Deck. It's now 2280, so you can fit more SSDs in there. And the kind of final thing that they've touched on is that they've moved the SD card slot. So I don't know if you remember, Pete, that there was this big problem with the SD card slot on the original ROG Ally. That basically it was next to the fan and it was melting SD cards and burning
oh
them out.
no, I forgot about
They
that. That's
did,
crazy.
yeah, they did an update to fix to quote unquote fix that, but it basically just meant the fan span a little bit louder, a little bit faster in order to accommodate that. And people are still reporting that it's burning out SD cards, and they've had to send them in to get replaced. But they've moved the SD card slot. Asus told The Verge that we don't want people to think that we had to move the slot because of SD card issues. We just had to move things around the board to make them fit. I'm not sure I 100% believe that.
Yeah, right. Like, come on. It's like,
Espe-
you sure about that one? You sure about
yeah,
that's why?
it's a bit of a strange one, especially considering like that was one that I think and the battery life were people's two main gripes with the device.
Amazingly, this device just happens to have solutions for both of those things. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally
yeah. I mean,
unrelated.
the battery life makes sense. They said they don't plan on selling an aftermarket battery upgrade for original Ally buyers in the same way that Valve didn't for the Steam Deck OLED. I'd imagine the boards changed a little bit, and obviously the casings had to change in order to accommodate the larger battery pack. We've got no word on pricing at the moment, but the existing ROG Ally is sticking around, so that may see a price cut. Or we're looking at the ROG Ally X coming in at a higher price point, which is where I would imagine they go with it. That's kind of pitching it as a more premium device. It's got more RAM in there. It's got all of these kind of improvements, better battery life. It would make sense to me that because they're calling this the X, it's kind of the premium model in the same way that the
Yeah,
Series X and the Series S on the Xbox side are
they're like,
the two models they've got.
that's like the iPhone model, right? Like it's like
Mm.
you have the regular one, and then you've got like the Pro, right, or whatever. That's a little bit better, but essentially the same device.
Yeah, but it's worth saying the things that are staying the same, the system on the chip and the screen, they stick around. We're not getting an OLED panel on the ROG Ally X, which I think some people will be disappointed with, but some people really like the screen on the Ally. It's 120 hertz versus the Steam Deck OLED's 90 hertz, and we've also got VRR on there, which obviously the Steam Deck doesn't support. Which can be a real game changer when you're trying to hit those like higher refresh rates. But they are saying that even though you're not going to get any of these like hardware improvements on the ROG Ally X, that they are also releasing a new software update that's going to let people do stuff that the Steam Deck owners have had the pleasure of doing since day one, which is share button mappings for various games with Ally owners. So it's kind of about time that came over.
Yeah, that's definitely a nice feature. It's one that we talk about all the time, being one of the really valuable things about the deck, especially in the early days.
What's
Um,
your like gut feeling on this device? Because I think for me, I was a little disappointed. I was
yeah,
expecting something a little bit more. I was expecting an OLED. Like I remember when we were talking in our kind of show chat yesterday, you were saying, "Oh, it looks like it's going to be an OLED model," but that's obviously not proven to be the case, and it's minor tweaks.
yeah, which I think to me, I don't know. I think when I talk about these devices, I try to not show my bias too much because I obviously am a believer in what the Steam Deck offers, right? And as far back as the reveal of the original Ally, you and I have kind of taken the stance of like, why would you buy one of these other like Windows based devices when the Steam Deck just has so much more going on, right? Like Valve's support of the device is better. It's a dedicated device that like is deeply entrenched in their ecosystem, which you're already probably a part of. Like it's just there's so much that like if you buy a Steam Deck, it has great functionality and you have the kind of promise that the device will grow with you because we've seen it grow, right? Whereas like, with the Ally, it has a few advantages here and there depending on, I guess, what you're looking for. But I've never really felt like it or the other like devices of its ilk have really done enough to prove to me anyway why someone would want to pick one of those devices. I guess unless I can't remember the name of it. What was the name of that really high end one that Ioneo did?
The Coon, yeah.
Sure, the Coon, right? Like I guess if you had something like that where you're like, oh, like I want like the fucking Corvette of handheld PCs, and I want to get something that's really hot and really high powered or whatever, then fair enough. But you know, barring that, it's kind of like it's hard for me to understand why you would make that call specifically. And looking at this, like I'm left kind of just asking why, whereas like I think when I looked at the OLED deck, like I said, a new nicer like an OLED screen is something that some people will buy a new device for just on its face because OLED is great technology and it really does make a difference in terms of display, right? But then on top of that, better battery life, better performance, all those other little things. It was like, all right, cool. Like I to me, I see why if I owned one, I'd justify an upgrade. If I'd been on the fence, maybe this is the device that pushes me over. I look at this and I'm like, I mean, 30 to 40% battery increases, again, that's a big deal. Nothing to sneeze at. And more RAM is potentially interesting, but not knowing how much more is kind of a big question, right? Because it's like, what's the price differential on this device when ultimately what you're talking about is a better battery life? Maybe I won't melt my SD card. Great. It's just like
Which honestly shouldn't be a selling point. You
exactly
shouldn't be selling a new device on the fact that your
that
previous
it
one had
fixed
a
the
defect.
problems of the old one, right?
Yeah.
And also you have to pay
Especially
to
if
upgrade
you're
it.
still selling the original device as
Right.
well. It's
Yeah.
kind of strange. You can see why they put that caveat in there when they were talking with The Verge,
Yeah.
because
It
people
was
are
going to
just
be a
going to be like,
talking point.
well, it was obviously going to be a talking point. I think I agree with you. It's a strange upgrade. I could have seen it if this was replacing the original ROG Ally, that we've made
Yeah.
these improvements. This is going to be the new device moving forwards. If you buy one now, you're kind of getting the 2024 model. It's like the PS5 Slim model, except this one's a little bit chunkier.
Right.
You get
Exactly. And
all
it's
of
like
these improvements.
you don't bat an eye at that, right? It's like, okay, yeah, like this device has undergone a iteration. It, is probably a little bit better. It's a little cheaper to produce. The profit margins are a little bit better for them. Like that's normal, right? But they're treating this like the next phase of the Ally device, right? Even if it's not a 2, it's being treated like a point 0.5, right? It has its own name. It had a quote unquote product reveal, all that stuff. And to me, that's the other part of it is like, I don't know why they even kind of like treated this like it was an event because like
Yeah, it was really strange.
they didn't
Like
really
they,
give you any information. It's like if you weren't going to show the device, but you're like, it's going to be black. It's like, why don't you just wait until you have something to show us? Like,
Yeah,
and I get
it's
it.
less than
It's
a
the
month away for
birthday.
yeah, but it's less than a month away. You could have been like, "Happy birthday! In a month, we're going to show this thing off."
Yeah, and just say nothing else, right? But to be like, hey, it's coming. Here's its name. It's gonna have a new colorway. It's gonna have this upgrade. This, but we can't talk about it. It's like it feels like a nothing burger. And like going into that announcement, I was very much expecting either, you know, like I said, like an OLED model that was like, okay, cool, great, standard upgrade that we all can understand,
Hmm.
or a two. And
I was expecting a two.
I
I
was
really
thinking
was.
that they were going to do that and they were going to be like,
Yeah.
hey, like we're going to beat Steam Deck to the punch and we're going to come out with the next hot thing. We'll keep supporting the old one because that one is, still a solid device. And, but it's like, all right, like, this is the kind of thing where if you were maybe thinking about buying one and now you have this option, great, right? Like a premium version of a product that is, largely well received is like never a bad thing. But I don't know, it doesn't inspire much excitement, I think, for the device. And I think that if you were not already like have one sitting in your cart, like waiting, then it's like to me this
I don't
isn't
think it's
it.
pushing you to do it, especially
No.
considering it's coming in at a higher price point. I think for me, maybe if I
Well,
had one in my cart.
theoretically, right? It's coming
Well,
in
no,
at a higher
I
price
just
point.
I just read over the Verge's article, and they have said that it is coming in at a higher price point than the
Okay.
original.
Yeah, I don't. I
Um,
think that sucks. I think that's not a good look. And it's like not to say that the product itself is bad, right? Like the people I know who own an Ally like it, and I know at least one person who she prefers it to the deck because she has tendonitis, so like lighter device makes a big difference. So it's like okay, great, but now this one's
I mean,
heavy.
well, that's not
So
this is not going to help
yeah,
it.
so it's like, oh shit, okay. Like the one thing I've heard people say is like, oh, it's easier to manage. It's like, all right, well, I don't know. So like, take that aside. That's anecdotal. But like, what is the value prop of this device over an alternative? And
I think the value prop that Asus thinks they have is that they are the number one alternative to the Steam Deck, and they offer Windows. So they've said
sure,
that in a interview with The Verge, Asus said that they still believe in Windows. We are very open-minded to looking at other solutions, and the company has had conversations with Valve, but Asus has philosophical and logistical reasons to stick with Microsoft's OS, including a desire to have inclusiveness of all different game platforms instead of relying about Steam.
yeah, I mean, okay, like fair enough. I think, I think, I think that's good ultimately. I think them kind of being like, hey, like we're open to other solutions, but we're committed to working with Windows is interesting because I don't know. We've talked a lot about it, right? And I know you have interest in seeing other devices come out using SteamOS. I'm not as excited about that as a prospect, just because it's like I can't imagine that anyone is going to make a better device using SteamOS than the Steam Deck. Whereas with Windows, like we've talked a lot about how there was that programming jam, right, where like they were working on a
Mm.
handheld version of Windows. That's something that it's clearly like something people are thinking about, and it's something that I think is potentially something we could see them actually double down on in the next couple of years and see get developed a little bit more seriously. Um, which I think is interesting in theory, right? Like if that comes together and there is a better performant handheld version of Windows, or if you know a company like Asus is able to develop um like a container or something, right, that can create a more user
Well, they've got
friendly.
that with Armory Crate.
Oh, right. But even that, right? Like it's like you were saying, we just got 1.5 of that, and it's only just starting to add some basic functionality. So I mean, that's a good thing, though, right? Like I think the idea that like maybe it's several versions from now of Armory Crate, but like if they are committed to Windows, somebody is like trying to improve that experience. And I think if they get to the point where it is more seamless and where they can really hang their hat on the fact that like the handheld Windows experience is better, and that like, oh, this is the best place to play Game Pass natively, right? Or this is the best place to play, Epic Game
Or it
Store
could be,
games or whatever,
yeah,
right?
or
Like,
yeah, it could be games that you can't play. Like Destiny, for example. They've still not brought over the game to
yeah, anything
Linux
that
because they've got worried about anti-cheat.
right, anything that doesn't support Linux, right? That like that has that anti-cheat problem, anything like that, yeah. And I think that's if they can keep doing that, right? If they can advance that part of the device and the experience, I think that's where they become a more interesting competitor to the Steam Deck. Because right now, I think of any of them, the Ally, the ROG's efforts have definitely been the best and the most enticing, I think, to as a non Steam Deck alternative. But
I
even
agree, but I also think that's because it's available in Best Buy. You can't walk into Best Buy and get an Iron Neo or a GPD, but you can walk into Best Buy and you'll see an ROG Ally on a stand next to the laptops or maybe
well,
next to the gaming section.
we've talked about the problem with Iron Neo, right? It's like they're flooding the market with these things. So it's like
Yeah,
the
you have a
idea that
new one
like
every 2 minutes.
and every device you buy is going to be immediately obsolete, and then it's like, what does the support for that look like, right?
Well, I mean, the support for the ROG's not been great though. I mean, if we're only getting 1.5 a year later, they've not been adding improvements in the same way that
Yeah,
Valve
that's a good
has with the
point.
Steam
Yeah,
Deck. It's like,
we're on 3.6 of Steam OS, right? It's like, the
and not to
iteration
mention
is
all of the client updates that Valve has brought us. I mean, 3.6 also brings updates to the firmware on the dock. The ROG Ally still, yes, it supports external GPUs, but it's still their proprietary solution, which is very expensive. So you're kind of locked into that ecosystem. So there are concerns I have. I think Windows for me though is just the number one pain point. It's like using desktop mode on the Steam Deck 100% of the time. Yeah, you can open up big picture mode on the Windows side, but I don't think that goes far enough. And if is this fundamental, desire to include all gaming platforms? Well, they've all got all different launchers. They're all separate apps. You've got to, and don't forget the ROG Ally doesn't have the trackpads that the Steam Deck has. You've either got to use the touch screen, which is not great in Windows, or you've got to switch to like mouse mode and use the joysticks as a mouse, which is not a great solution either. So I don't really know why they wouldn't look at alternatives. Maybe offer it in 2 SKUs, or maybe allow me to pick what OS I put on there. Valve's obviously not opened up SteamOS to any other handhelds yet. That was their goal. I don't know if they still think that that's the best business solution for them.
I hope not, honestly. I think that I think it benefits other platforms more than it benefits them. Like, obviously,
I agree, because like if you open it up, you're shown the Steam store front and center.
which is, I mean, like, that's good, right? Like, obviously, like, being able to connect those devices straight to the Steam ecosystem is something that's valuable. But like, I don't know. I feel like you run the risk of like muddying the waters in a bad way. Like, and maybe it's just me feeling like gun shy because of their experience with the Steam machines. But it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know that I'd be rushing to like invite other people to like monkey with our OS and then potentially provide like a bad experience for people. Whereas like with the deck, it's controlled, right? And it's like, that it's gonna be performant and that it's gonna give you what you expect. Good.
Yeah, we're gonna go. One sec. Sorry. Yeah, it's the downstairs one. I mean, inside the cupboard on the stairs. Finally gonna be able to go for a piss downstairs in my toilet that's been broken since I moved in.
I'll tell you what, Steve. I'm gonna cut this little bit on YouTube, but during the processing minute, everyone's gonna hear about how you're getting your toilet fixed, because otherwise this show's going up like 2 hours late. So everybody, you can hear the 1 minute detour where Steve had to let the plumber in. All right. So, yeah. So I think ultimately that is where I come down on it, where it's like I think the idea of a dedicated handheld Windows PC is something that I think is interesting, and I think it's cool that ROG is, out there like trying to create this device and push those boundaries. But based on what we've seen in the last year, and like this as kind of their solution for a 1.5, or whatever you want to call it, I don't know. I just don't find a lot to be excited about. And like, I'm a pretty easy mark. I like handhelds. I like buying new toys. I like being sold on the idea that something fits into my ecosystem and that I could have a use case for it. And I just, I think when you just compare pound for pound what this device offers versus a Steam Deck, it's just not there. And I was excited by the idea of this presentation making a case, right? For me to be like, oh, okay, like, even if I don't want to switch over, even if I don't necessarily feel like I need another device, that I could, if somebody was asking me, hey, I want to get into these things, what should I get? That I could entertain the idea of an alternative. Because to me, I would never suggest one of these devices, I think
No, me neither, no.
how, like, we always talk about how, like, the Steam Deck is great because it's fairly new user friendly, and if you are a tinkerer, if you do want to go deeper, that option exists for you. I feel like these like Windows based devices are like on the wrong side of that, where like I think if you give that to the average person, they're gonna find it to be a little bit obtuse. And
I mean, number one, you have to figure out how to install Steam straight out of the box because it doesn't come pre-installed. So it's like you've got to go through all these hoops. It's like setting up a Windows laptop, but you don't have a keyboard or mouse. So it's this extra complication that you have. So it's not a user-friendly device, but I do think there is a market for it. I really do. There clearly is. They've sold it. They've sold a decent number of these devices, but I don't think it is the until the Windows experience improves or they kind of cave in and they include SteamOS or something similar to SteamOS. I don't think we're going to see a true competitor to the Steam Deck in that regard. But I like seeing these improvements. I like seeing these devices. I don't know that we would have got the Steam Deck OLED if it wasn't for these devices coming into the market and kind of pushing Valve to kind of raise the bar a little bit. Obviously, the ROG Ally has that 120 hertz refresh rate. The Steam Deck now has 90 hertz. I think that's probably partially because of the ROG Ally and people pushing for higher refresh rates. But I also think that 120 hertz screen is overkill. How many games are you really playing 120 frames per second on one of these low
on a
powered
device that's not
handheld
that
devices?
powerful. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like, okay. It to me that feels like very akin to like the thing we always like make fun of like the PlayStation 5 and Xbox for.
Yeah.
Like, it's got the 8K sticker on. It's like, yeah, but so like
Who's got an
literally
8K
maybe
TV?
it's like nobody was what that's not even a thing. It's not a resolution. What games run at 8K? Like
No, also nobody wants it. No one's asking for 8K. Like, come on. Who do you know that owns an 8K television?
most people are just getting a 4K television, right? Like it's like,
Kind of crazy, really.
yeah, it's so it's like great, okay, like 120 hertz, like that's great, but it's like, is that actually a tangible advantage? And I feel like the answer is no. And like, I don't know, like that's where I can't help but come down on it. Like even these devices that are more powerful, it's like, yeah, but to what end? Like it's like, I don't think the gap is big enough to justify having a worse support experience and less functionality to have slightly better benchmarks. But that's just me, I guess. Because we I think you and I are pretty on the same page about this device just not being it for us. But there were some of us in the community here that that thought it was interesting. Scale Speeder wrote in and said ROG Ally X with better thumbsticks, battery, and storage, running on the gamer's OS of choice, Windows, able to run any launcher, including big Steam Big Picture mode, with the best screen on any handheld. Get the price equivalent to the Steam Deck OLED, and it's a winner.
See, I don't agree that this is the best screen of any handheld.
I definitely don't agree. I think
that's the Steam Deck.
The Steam Deck OLED has a much better screen than this thing. Yeah, totally. I know people really liked the ROG Ally screen compared to the base Steam Deck screen, but the OLED, it's OLED. It's it's a
Yeah.
really nice screen.
And like better thumbsticks, Steam Deck OLED had the same. I've not tried the ROG Ally thumbsticks, but I've had no issue with the Steam Deck OLEDs. The original Steam Deck I did, they were a little bit flat. Your fingers kind of didn't grip onto them as much as I would have liked, but the OLED model definitely fixed that issue I had. I think
I also
really
don't. I also don't think the base Dex thumbsticks were bad enough for me to warrant buying a device that I think is overall
no, like if
worse.
you needed to, you could have just put some grips on it. You know, the
Yeah,
little covers you can get
or
on
or
Amazon, just
replace
shove it
them.
on.
Like, it's like that was an option, right? Like that was one of the easier things to replace. So right.
Mm. Yeah, you can. You can get the kit sticks. I think they use the same caps though. Like you didn't get new
Okay.
caps with them. It just replaced the stick underneath.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
yeah.
like fair enough, right? Like if these are all things that are differentiators for you, scale speeder, then like more power to you. But to me, it's like, like even that, like running on the gamer's OS of choice, Windows. It's like, yeah, but is Windows the gamer's OS of choice, or is it just the OS we have to use if you want to play
It's like
games?
yeah, it's the de facto standard. I think if there was something that was more gaming oriented, then people would go for that. It's just the OS of choice because most games work on it because it's been used for decades. Now I think people are opening up to the idea that maybe there is a true alternative out there. SteamOS has definitely proven to be a viable option. Proton is phenomenal. They've implemented fixes for games like Fallout 4 where I had frame pacing issues in Proton that weren't fixed on the actual game level. So if you played it on SteamOS, you had a better experience than you did on Windows. And granted, there are some games you just can't play because of anti-cheat or because the games aren't compatible with Proton. That's fair enough. But you can also install Windows on your Steam Deck if you want to. That's also an option. And I think for me, I would pick a Steam Deck over an ROG Ally any day. It's probably going to be similar in weight. You've got a better screen. You have SteamOS there, and you're in that ecosystem. And there's just so much there that the ROG Ally didn't offer. I mean, I didn't even realize you couldn't share button mappings. That is just phenomenal for me. The community layouts I can dip into and grab something for a game that wasn't designed for a handheld device. Like I can play Age of Empires on my Steam Deck, and it's got all of these mappings that someone spent hours making, where I can tap on the touchpad. It brings up a little quick menu, and I can do all of these actions that would have required function keys on a keyboard previously. That's not going to be something that I could have done on the ROG Ally, and I can't imagine that work would have been done on many games on the ROG Ally. It's a much smaller player base. The community mappings on SteamOS are shared across the whole of Steam. You know, it's if I've made a controller mapping on a desktop that's designed for a controller, so I can play games on a controller that were designed for a keyboard and mouse, I can pick that up on my Steam Deck. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Steam Deck exclusive controller mapping.
So a couple people in the community agree with you, and I'm going to read their thoughts in just a second here. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Steam Deck podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of May. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobe, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Tyler Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all the realest of the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Speaking of sister shows, we had a bunch of content in the feed this week. 2 episodes of Nintendo Noise this week, all about leaks around the Nintendo Switch 2 and then Nintendo's official acknowledgement of the device, where we had our dear friend Chewy back on the show for the first time in a long time. So go check out those episodes. And then we had 2 special episodes of the Flip Screen Games podcast talking all about what's going on over at Xbox and some of the really upsetting studio closures that have gone over there, as well as another extra little episode we did about Max's time with Hades 2. If you want to check all that out, go and check it out. We got feeds for those shows. You can find them on the YouTube channel. You can find links to all that and much more on flipscreen.games. However you choose to get involved and show your support. Thank you for tuning into the show. Remember, next week we're talking all about our experiences with SteamOS 3.6.0 preview. So if you want to write in with your questions or your experiences after updating to the this latest OS update, and if it had any effects on your deck's performance, make sure you write in and let us know, because we are very interested to hear how it's been impacting folks now that there's the word on the street that you might get some performance increases. Pretty cool. And that's the kind of thing you get with the Steam Deck, Steve, right? Come on. performance increases just from an OS update, you're not getting that across the fence.
I mean, potentially you would. I don't know that Windows put too much
you're not.
effort
No.
in. No, but you do get Windows Copilot, so
Great.
everyone's really excited about that and
AI.
being able to
Everyone
talk
loves
to AI.
AI. It's very useful. It's a very good, useful thing with no ethical considerations at all.
Yeah, I know that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Frankly, I won't buy one because it has that now. Get out of here. Okay, so I wanted to pull in a question here, or a comment, I guess. You know what? It's both. From Oods over on the, and this is a great username, by the way, Oods, love it. Who over on the Discord said, I think convenience is a lot when it comes to these handhelds. How comparable is it to the operating system of Steam?
It's dreadful. It's truly dreadful. It is just like being in desktop mode 100% of the time, and you have to. And granted, you can make Steam on Windows automatically boot into big picture mode, but when you boot up the ROG Ally, it still takes you to the Windows Hello login screen. You still have to open it up. It still has to boot Steam manually, and then it has to open up into big picture mode while all of the other shit's opening in the background, like Armory Crate and all of that other crap that comes with Windows when you first open a device. It's not like a handheld game console, which I think most people see the Steam Deck as, because it is like you're playing it in console mode rather than PC mode most of the time.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about convenience, like that's a huge part of it, right? And I think the point you were making earlier, right, about how they're just now getting the functionality with Armory Crate to be able to share button mappings and stuff like that. Like that is a convenience thing, right? That is a quality of life thing, and those are the kinds of things that I think Valve has handled so well with the Steam Deck, right? Of like when there is a popular complaint, it gets addressed. When there is a popular feature request, it usually comes quickly. And, in the areas where Valve doesn't have an official solution, there's often a community sourced solution that Valve.
Yeah, I mean, look at EmuDeck.
Right. Like, you want to talk about convenience. Goddamn. And I mean, I guess you could technically open EmuDeck on a Ally and it would work. But
there is now EmuDeck for Windows. They did bring that over, but it started on the Steam Deck. That's where it was born. I also think,
and to that point, right? Like, there's so many things like that, right? Like, how many plugins have we talked about? And granted, there's we have a bunch.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily need something like Junk Store, which we spoke about on last week's episode, because
you could just run
Epic.
Just
open up. You can just run the Epic Game Store, but that's not a great experience either. I think having it fully integrated into Steam is probably a nicer solution. One thing that I think a lot of people forget about with these devices is sleep mode. Windows is not very good at when you put it to sleep, the game suspends and you can just pick it back up where you left off. The Steam Deck and SteamOS has had a lot of work put into it in order to achieve that. You can be in a game of say Fallout 4 or Balatro or whatever you're playing at the moment. You can click the power button, it goes to sleep. You click it again, you pick it right back up where you left off.
I mean,
it runs
man,
exactly like a Switch in that regard.
And I forget where the cutoff point is, but if your deck dies dead, sometimes it's still because of cloud save, right? Like it'll still know where you were.
I had that yesterday. Yeah. It moaned at me at 3%. Had like 8 minutes battery life left. I couldn't get to the cable in time, and it just shut down. And it's like Balatro shutting down, and then it booted that off the device. But then because it had sunk the saves up to Steam, I could just pick it back up, and it was
exactly
no problem
where you were.
Yeah.
And it's like that doesn't really work as well on Windows. And it's like, again, in certain cases it will. If you're using Steam on your ROG Ally and the reason that it sunk is because of the Steam cloud servers, then you'd have that same experience. But again, it's just, I don't know. I think that those are quality of life features that are hard to undersell, because when you're used to them, it's like, yeah, of course it works that way. But it's like, until it doesn't. And to your point, that's something that Windows has historically not been super great at, is like putting the game to sleep and then having that lead to performance issues is not uncommon, So here's another one. This one comes from Mark Fox, who said, I think it's crazy that they expect people to pay more than the original price for a slight update. The Steam Deck OLED made everything better without going silly with the price. I know they can claw back cash from Steam sales, etc., but still, what would you want to see them do to it to even consider buying? And
Yeah,
I think
I think we've spoken about it all, right? It's the OLEDs I would want there, and I think I'd probably want like a full on revision. It's either it needs to be we need like an OLED display on there that makes it feel truly like a next level device, or SteamOS is an option,
even that though,
or I just want
that wouldn't be enough for me to consider at this point because I already own a Steam Deck and it's great and I like it and I don't have any reason to switch. Like,
say you didn't though. Like say you're in the market, you're like, oh, I want one
yeah,
of these handheld PCs, but
I
I'm
mean,
looking at the Steam Deck and I'm
I'd like
looking at
to
the
answer the
ROG Ally.
question. I'd like to answer the question both ways because I think for me to consider it as an alternative to someone else, I would say yeah, OLED screen for sure, right? Like you'd want to have, I would say, as close a match as you can, right? On any of those kinds of features, right? Like display, build quality, all that stuff. And I think a lot of those things are already pretty analogous. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's like a much, much better handheld Windows experience would be first and foremost. And I gotta say though, I think it would need to have a clear advantage, right? Like I think if they could be like, hey, it's got a benchmark, it's 30% more powerful than a Steam Deck.
Yeah.
It's got 50% better battery life. This big game that you want to play on Steam Deck that doesn't run, here it is running on the Ally, perfect, right? Like those would be the things that I think would really motivate me to consider it as an option for me, right? But I think for the average person, I mean, yeah, it would have to be layers of improving either Armory Crate or like the Windows handheld experience generally, because as long as it's like a situation where you have to open it like it's a PC and get into the launcher, and it's like that to me is all, they're little things, and if you don't care about them, then you don't care about them. But it's like that's what I like about the Steam Deck, is that it is like a console. It's the openness and the freedom of a PC with the seamlessness and simplicity of a console. And these devices just don't match up in that regard. And like for the only real benefit of this thing to be like, oh, I could run Game Pass on it, it's like, all right, but I could jump through those hoops and do that on my Steam Deck if I really cared about that, right? Clearly, I
You
don't.
could, or you could just like stream it. You know, you can
Mm-hmm.
use your Xbox and use something like Greenlight, or you could just stream it from the cloud. Like there are solutions for that.
And it's like, I get it that like base is better, right? Like that's what we want. That's what we all want. But it's like, am I going to buy a second device for that? No. Am I going to
Yeah.
choose a worse device for that one feature? No. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think for me, I don't think anything's making me consider buying it. And I remember last year when they were revealing it, right? And I was like, oh, it seems like it's going to be a little bit more powerful because it's got that higher TDP. It's got that VRR display, and I'm a big proponent of a variable refresh rate. I think it's phenomenal tech. I just don't think at this point anything swaying me from my Steam Deck OLED until we get that generational leap. But then even then, I think Valve is going to be the first one out the gate with that. They're working directly with AMD on custom silicon, whereas people like Asus are just shoving in chips that you can kind of get off the shelf with the Z1 and the Z1 Extreme. Granted, it's like a gaming centric chip, but it is just based off of a chip that's off the shelf, whereas Valve have that custom silicon in there, which I think, along with SteamOS, is really their kind of special sauce. It's how they can achieve such great performance at low TDP, which allows them to get honestly phenomenal battery life out of the Steam Deck OLED. I'm constantly surprised with how much I can do on battery.
I'll tell you what, I'm thinking about it. I think the number one thing that they could do that would make me really consider this device would be to find a way to have deeper integration with Xbox, and that like Xbox, like the like gaming mode that they have on PC,
Yeah,
and like it
yeah,
feels like
yeah.
that's kind of like maybe eventually going to be what Windows gaming will be kind of an extension of
That,
the
or we need
Xbox.
like an Xbox OS, it needs
Well,
to be
and
like,
that's
this is a specific gaming operating system.
or like just like a skew, right? It's like a
Yeah.
frame that goes over it that allows you to have a more seamless thing. And I think if you did something like that also allowed me to integrate my library, that would be more interesting to me. If it was like, hey, like if you own a game on Xbox, you can play it on your ROG Ally and you can seamlessly have that library move with you and whatever. Like that's something that would make me consider buying, would make me consider maybe making the jump if the OS was better. Because in that scenario, right, then I could have all my Xbox stuff and I could have all my Steam stuff just by opening big picture mode and like maybe, but I don't know. Like even that, it's like you're talking about it having to be a very, very specific thing that I just don't know that's ever gonna happen, or that's like ever something that you even entertain, right? Or that Xbox would ever even entertain, as we see them, seemingly changing a little bit of their tune when it comes to their kind of desire to invest in gaming as part of the business right now. So I don't know. It's a lot.
Well, it seems like they might be, but it's more like Microsoft gaming rather than Xbox gaming, and they're willing to just be on any platform, which follows the suit of PlayStation.
I mean, like that
as
could
well.
work in conjunction with like the ROG Ally. Like maybe that could actually be to its benefit, but I don't know. It's a lot of ifs for me before it's something that I'd even really consider. So it's like
I agree. I also
think that to me
if
just speaks volumes about how the baseline of the product is just not very attractive.
yeah, I also think if Microsoft is going to do it, they're probably going to make their own hardware rather than partnering up with someone like Asus.
Maybe, but it's like they've had so many failures when it comes to hardware, and like trying to enter the handheld space is like kind of dicey. I could see them partnering with somebody else and having that just be like, in the same way that like you've seen, like you said, like, Steam Deck have a relationship with AMD and like Nintendo have a relationship with Nvidia. Like maybe you do come up with a hardware partner where it's like, hey, you guys are great at making hardware.
I mean, Microsoft has that relationship with AMD too. The AMD Power has got the chips in the Xbox. They could do something similar with a handheld device. Maybe they do something like a Switch where it plugs in and it does get like more performance. Maybe the dock's got something in there. Maybe it's like an external GPU in the dock. There's something that they could do, and I think if they're not exploring a handheld, they've not really been looking at the market growing in the last few years since the Switch.
Especially while they're talking about how the market isn't growing and they need to find new players, right?
They've got to find a solution. I think handheld really is the way for them to go, and that's clear to me that the Steam Deck's been a phenomenal success. We've seen more of these handheld PCs pop up.
I think at the very least,
look over the fence at the Switch to see how well a handheld can sell.
I think at the very least, it's a way to double down the market you already have, right? To encourage them to buy another device. And that was
you could double dip on it, right?
And that was kind of Sony's strategy, right? With the Portal of like, it's an accessory, right? It's something to buy into our ecosystem rather than a new device we need to support. And it's like, a lot of people have their critiques of it, but I mean, clearly it's connected with a market, right? So I don't know. It's an interesting one, but I think to me, this was just not it. I think they needed to have more in the chamber. They need to, like the ROG Ally 2, right? Whatever they're going to call it, needs to step things up. I think it needs to have more differentiators from the Steam Deck aside from hanging its hat on the fact that it runs Windows. Because that's, I think, honestly, like kind of one of its biggest detriments when you get right down to it. So I'm interested in hearing what you guys think. Obviously, some of you were interested in the device. A lot more of you were not. Are there any of you who are thinking about buying it? Are there any of you who are already Ally players in the audience that would maybe do an upgrade? As any of you see yourself buying a second device and maybe having two of these things so that you can kind of play both sides of the field? I'd be interested in hearing what folks think and if this is a device that anybody is interested in taking home. But that's where we're going to wrap it for today. So if you want to write in with your thoughts on this or any other episode of the show, or if you want to hit us up with your thoughts and experiences on Steam OS 3.6.0 update preview, make sure you write in all the ways that you can by heading over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find all the places we are all over the web. However you choose to get involved to show your support, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.